So Bill Gates recommended years ago that people read this book, How to Lie with Statistics. I showed people in another video, but over the last few months I decided to actually read the book, and it's shocking. Right on the back it says, if you want to outsmart a crook, learn his tricks. Darrell Huff explains exactly how to and how to lie with statistics. From distorted graphs and biased samples to misleading averages, there are countless statistical dodges that lend cover to anyone with an axe to grind or a product to sell. The Atlantic called it a pleasantly subversive little book guaranteed to undermine your faith in the almighty statistic. If I were to say this stuff myself, they'd call me a conspiracy theorist, kick me off Facebook, censor me more, kick me off Instagram, destroy my life and career like they're already trying to do. But it's not my opinion. It's in the book that Bill Gates told everybody to read. And the book's all about what's happening this year. The difference is while they're all doing it, they don't want you to question them. Creating communist-style censorship around everything they do, convincing you that everybody thinking critically is a horrible person that needs to be immediately destroyed. Let's dive into the book and see what Bill Gates wanted you to read a few years ago. It says, you may have heard of the discouraging news that 1952 was the worst polio year in medical history. This conclusion was based on what might seem all the evidence anyone could ask for. There were far more cases reported in that year than ever before. But when experts went back on these figures, they found a few things that were more encouraging. One was that there were so many children at the most susceptible ages in 1952 that cases were bound to be at a record number if the rate remained level. Another, that a general consciousness of polio was leading more frequent diagnosis and recording of mild cases. Finally, there was an increased financial incentive, there being more polio insurance and more aid available from the National Foundation of Infantile Paralysis. All of this threw considerable doubt on the notion that polio had reached a new high, and the total number of deaths confirmed the doubt. Does that sound familiar to you? Of course. Let's continue. Common sense has somehow failed in the face of the convincingly precise and authoritative. Sound familiar? Of course. Let's continue. The guilt does not always lie with the medical profession alone. Public pressure and hasty journalism often launch a treatment that is unproved, particularly when the demand is great and the statistical background is hazy. So it was with the cold vaccines that were popular some years back and the antihistamines more recently. A good deal of the popularity of these unsuccessful cures sprang from the unreliable nature of the ailment and from a defect of logic. Given time, a cold will cure itself. How can you avoid being fooled by unconclusive results? Sound familiar? Of course. Let's continue. Sometimes the number in the sample is not what it appears to be. A remarkable instance of this came out in connection with a test of a polio vaccine a few years ago. It appeared to be an impressively large-scale experiment as medical ones go. 450 children were vaccinated in a community and 680 were left unvaccinated as controls. Shortly thereafter, the community was visited by an epidemic. Not one of the vaccinated children contracted a recognizable case of polio. Neither did any of the controls. What the experimenters had overlooked or not understood in setting up their project was the low incidence of paralytic polio. At the usual rate, only 2 cases would have been expected in a group this size, and so the test was doomed from the start to have no meaning. But I was told you can't question the statistics by the people who told me to read How to Lie with Statistics, which illustrated decades ago how to lie with statistics, which of course is happening this year. But if you tell the truth about how they're lying with statistics, your enemy number one of the corrupt media, the corrupt bureaucratic health industry, and corrupt big pharma. Let me point out some obvious ways that they've lied with statistics this year. I actually pointed this one out in March. So the World Health Organization said early on that a 3.4% mortality rate was what was going on. 3.4%, that's really scary. Even President Trump had the common sense to know that it was wrong, and he got smeared by the media. They said Trump says he thinks 3.4% coronavirus death rate is a false number. They mocked him. They mocked people like me and censored people like me, but it was obviously wrong for a reason. They didn't even have mass testing at the time. So if you're barely testing anybody, but there's a certain amount of deaths, the death rate seems really, really high. But once you test millions upon tens of millions of people and you get more asymptomatic people there, the number goes down, obviously. So 3.4 was never the real death rate. I knew that. Trump knew that. A lot of people knew that. But the World Health Organization, who works hand in hand with our social media, lied with statistics. That means that the death rate that they're giving us is much higher than it really is. That's very simple math. But you're not even allowed to question them anymore. We live in a communist, medical, tyrannical state where they just want to destroy the country, make you live in fear and stress, close down your gym, close down your restaurants, destroy hundreds of thousands of professions, and say that they're the good guys, because they can't be questioned. How to lie with statistics. But you're supposed to believe the models they show you, right? Well, The Atlantic actually said, don't believe the COVID-19 models. That's not what they're for. They're not to be believed? Well, of course not. They are lying with statistics, but somebody should tell President Trump that, because although he head fakes with the truth every now and then this year, he's been lying with statistics, or he believes the false statistics that Atlantic says not to believe, and he still touts them.
What's wrong with having to close it down? We saved millions of lives. You know, a lot of people say we should have gone herd. Let's go herd. Ask him, how are they doing in Brazil? He's a great friend of mine. Not good. You heard about Sweden, right? Too much. Ask him how they doing in Sweden. We saved millions of lives.
That's our freedom fighter in this country saying lockdowns. That's good. I'm glad we did that. That saved millions of lives. Sweden and Brazil, which by the way, right when I'm making this video, are beating the United States in deaths per capita. And the statistics were never what the news, Trump, and Democrats said about Sweden. They were lying with statistics the whole time, or just making up things that didn't exist and saying them enough that people believe them. But when it comes to those models, two of the most famous ones that they used were the Imperial model and the IHME model. Interestingly enough, Bill Gates, who told people years ago to read How to Lie with Statistics, gave IHME, which is the University of Washington's Institute for Health, Metrics, and Evaluation, $279 million a few years ago. He knows the value of statistics and how they could shape public perception no matter how true they are or not. He also funded the Imperial model in 2016 to the tune of around $5.5 million. In fact, when it comes to pharma and media, it's almost harder to find institutions that Bill Gates hasn't put his hands in. For all the money and power that guy has, he's not really great in interviews and his body language is horrific. Take a look.
The Moderna vaccine sound concerning. We looked. After the second dose, at least 80% of participants experienced a systemic side effect, ranging from severe chills to fevers. So, are these vaccines safe?
And you know, the side effects were not super severe. That is, it didn't cause permanent health problems for the things there. Moderna did have to go with a fairly high dose. And so, to get the antibodies, some of the other vaccines are able to go with lower doses to get responses that are pretty high, including the J&J and the Pfizer. And so there's a lot of characteristics of these vaccines. It's great that we have multiple of them that are going out there. And yes, I think
you know the data better than I do. But the data showed that everybody with a high dose had a side effect.
Yeah, but some of that is not dramatic, where it's just super painful. But yes, we need to make sure there's not severe side effects. The FDA, I think, will do a good job of that.
But Bill Gates isn't worried about side effects for two reasons. One, he knows that Facebook, Instagram, Google, and all the mainstream social media will censor, silence, demonetize, and destroy anybody who talks about it, no matter how true it is or not. And also because of what the pharmacy industry pressured Reagan into signing, which is the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, in which the purpose was to eliminate financial liability from vaccine manufacturers. So many of the mainline scheduled vaccines and the companies don't have liability. It's a big pharma government collaboration. And when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccines, Wall Street Journal laid it out perfectly. People harmed by coronavirus vaccines will have little recourse. Any payouts for injuries will come from a less generous program than in years past. The US government paid out $4.4 billion over more than 30 years covering injuries related to a host of vaccines from flu to polio, but payouts for potential injuries from COVID-19 vaccines will be covered by a far less generous program. How nice. COVID-19 vaccine injuries will be covered under a program known as the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Fund, which was set up in 2010 to cover harm resulting from vaccines for a flu pandemic or drugs to treat an anthrax or Ebola outbreak, for example. This year, Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar said the Countermeasures Fund should also cover injuries from COVID-19 vaccines, giving drug companies immunity from potential liability lawsuits. They have full immunity. So when you watch a pill commercial on television, they tell you all the side effects because they have to legally so they don't get sued. Sometimes you read about Purdue Pharmaceuticals, or you see a Johnson & Johnson commercial, or you see one of a dozen drug commercials, and they talk about lawsuits for a past product that they once told you was safe. Well, the companies that Bill Gates funds don't have to worry about all that because they have legal immunity. Isn't that just convenient? And you're not even allowed to talk about it on social media. They'll call you a kook while they walk around looking like this, and they'll race you from the public sphere so fast your head will spin. Does that mean that they're right? Of course not. Does it mean the information that they're posting is true? Of course not. Does it mean that critical thinking's bad? No. Does it mean that you can't lie with statistics? Of course not. I just showed you and Bill Gates just showed you. They just know how to control you, and I guess a lot of people just submit to it, don't think for themselves, or are afraid to speak up. And a lot of people like President Trump because they thought he was going to do something about the liability. In fact, many still do. They make up fake theories all the time to try to justify what President Trump's doing because they think in their head he's going to do what they want him to do. But similar to left-wingers, a lot of them cognitive dissonance and they just block out information that isn't what they want to hear. For example, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. explains how Trump almost set up a vaccine safety council with him, but decided to go with Big Pharma executives instead.
So anyway, Big Pharma stepped in and put some money in.
And Trump appoints Pfizer's lobbyist to run FDA. Scott Gottlieb, and Eli Lilly's lobbyist, Alex Azar, to run HHS. And as soon as they came in, they shut us down.
And was that were you bummed about that?
Was I bummed? Yeah, I was very bummed.
I'd have been bummed.
Yeah. Of course,
it
was like within our grasp, you know.
In both of those two meetings, he asked me if vaccines weren't a bad thing because he was considering a commission to look into ill effects of vaccines. And somebody, his name is Robert Kennedy Jr., was advising him that vaccines were causing bad things. And I said, no, that's a dead end. That would be a bad thing. Don't do that.
So whether people want to admit it or not, this explains why Trump has become a vaccine salesman. Ivanka Trump said in January 13th, Trump partnered with Moderna and the NIH. That's before everybody was really taking coronavirus seriously. Interesting. January 13th. Business Insider reported on January 27th that Jeff Bezos hosted an extravagant after-party for a secret club whose members wear gold medals, and it was attended by Ivanka Trump and Bill Gates just a few weeks later. Interesting. Bill Gates has been funding Moderna for years, who didn't have a product before this mRNA vaccine, and gave them over $1 million in March of 2019. Interesting. President Trump has been the biggest fanatic of Moderna, buying hundreds of millions of their doses, some months ago before their trials were done, and some just a few weeks ago. He's such a Moderna fanatic that he tweeted, "Moderna now applying for emergency vaccine approval. FDA must act quickly. Operation Warp Speed has been a great modern-day miracle." He went from skeptic to full-blown vaccine salesman who is proud of his accomplishment of rushing a vaccine out to the public faster than anyone ever, knowing that the companies are completely immune from liability. President Bolsonaro of Brazil mentioned this, but I don't want to play that clip because they'll probably censor my video, fact check it with a claim that I never made, and use it to demonetize me like they did on Facebook and cut my reach. And telling the truth about President Trump, unlike a bunch of fake liars who hallucinate theories when their cognitive dissonance isn't their friend, I've taken a lot of backlash, and it sucks. In some ways, Trump has been good this year, but in many ways he hasn't. He's head-faked us a bunch of times, and he's really just turned into a socialist, communist, big pharma salesman. People think he fought the lockdowns really hard, but he really didn't. He extended social distancing guidelines to April 30th and backed off his idea to reopen the economy by Easter. He did pretty much everything Fauci and Bill Gates could have wanted. Even though I voted for him, I'm wildly disappointed by him this year. The Republican Party have turned into full-blown socialists who say, here, take the money even though we're not even giving you a path to opening up your restaurant without restrictions. And in blue states, red cities are still being held captive, and in red states, blue cities run the show and they don't listen to the freedom orders. And President Trump is running around selling Moderna vaccines with very little plan to reopen the economy. All the meanwhile, he screams China virus, and people think he's fighting China. But I don't really see that as the case. The news is pouring in about how China's economy is doing good. They're predicted to pass us even quicker than normal. They're running circles around us and the rest of the world. Their government works in unison. I don't agree with it, but they work in unison. They protect the state and they say anybody that goes against us, we're going to shut down. It's messed up. I don't agree with it, but they're rising. And in America, it's the opposite. Anybody who does real journalism, real reporting to make our country do better gets targeted. And anybody that tanks our country with fear, stress, business shutdown, and a downward downward spiral is elevated. One might even be in the White House in February. But without getting too off track, how to lie with statistics. If you search the flu, here's a few things that come up. Flu cases in Michigan remain much lower than usual. Of course. Fear of a twindemic recede as flu lies low. There's not that much flu, but they tried to scare you with the word twindemic. And then last but not least, ABC says flu numbers are down this year due to higher vaccination rates amid COVID pandemic. Oh, is that right? Well, you can't question it or else they'll try to destroy your career, but there's a lot of reasons that it's down, and I don't even know what I'm allowed to say. I'll give you one example. Thousands of people were added to the death list, never having even tested for COVID. You could get a positive COVID-19 test without ever even getting a test in multiple states. All you need to have is a cough in some states, and tell your doctor that you were around somebody with COVID, and they can give you a positive COVID test. Symptoms: cough, shortness of breath, or difficulty breathing. So if you have a cough, you've reached clinical criteria. All you need is a cough or a fever with a sore throat or a headache with a fever or a headache with a sore throat, which can obviously be dozens of other illnesses. Everyone knows that. But just a cough or a headache and a sore throat, and bang, you have the clinical criteria for coronavirus. So if you remember, all you need is clinical criteria and epidemiologic evidence. So now that you know the clinical criteria is literally a cough or a sore throat and a headache, what's the other evidence? Epidemiological evidence or linkages are defined by the CDC as one or more of the following exposures in the 14 days before onset of symptoms, close contact with a confirmed or probable case of COVID-19 disease, or close contact with a person with clinically compatible illness and linkage to a confirmed case of COVID-19 disease, travel to a residence in an area with sustained ongoing community transmission of SARS-CoV-2, member of a risk cohort as defined by public health authorities during an outbreak. So let me get this straight. You just have to be in close contact with somebody that you think had coronavirus, or in an area where people had coronavirus and a cough, and they'll tell you have COVID-19, or a headache and sore throat or chills and a headache, and in close contact with a probable cause of COVID-19, and you combine those two, that means you have the clinical criteria and the epidemiologic evidence, which means they're allowed to say you are a probable case of COVID-19 and add you to the total cases of COVID-19, despite the fact that you've never even had a test. We've never had a mass testing scheme like this. The more you test, the more you'll find. The more you diagnose without a test, the more you get, so it's impossible to keep the cases and tests low. Where did the flu go? Don't suggest you could lie with statistics, even though Bill Gates told you could lie with statistics, and you can factually lie with statistics, and they obviously this year dozens of times have lied with statistics to take away your business, to take away your freedom, to take away your mental health, to take away your physical health, closing down gyms. California closing down outdoor dining despite even having accurate and real data that makes any sort of logical sense. When you realize who these people are and what they're really doing, it makes a lot more sense. And with all the information I've received, I personally don't think they're looking out for our public health. I think they're looking out for money and power and control, and that's not unreasonable to think, considering the history of people like Pol Pot, Stalin, Hitler, and others. And the present day, if you look at politicians and pharmacy companies, they don't all have the best track record. It's not 100% success, and anybody who questions them is a horrible conspiracy theorist. That's the conspiracy theory. The truth is, a lot of the world operates off power and money, and not everybody's the real deal. They will lie for money and power. And before I leave, I just want to give you an example of how they call everything a conspiracy theory, even though it's factually true and mainstream news reports on it. Here's one recently. It says Havana syndrome likely caused by pulsed microwave energy, government study finds. The mysterious neurological symptoms experienced by American diplomats in China and Cuba are consistent with the effects of directed microwave energy, according to a long-awaited report by the National Academies of Sciences that cites medical evidence to support the long-held conviction of American intelligence officials. It says the report obtained Friday by NBC News does not conclude that the directed energy was delivered intentionally by a weapon, as some U.S. officials have long believed, but it raises that disturbing possibility. So NBC News is allowed to question these type of things if they exist and if they're being used, but you're not. This is really what it's about, folks. They think we're peasants. They go to dinner with their friends. They tell you not to go to dinner with your friends. They visit their family in large groups. They tell you not to visit your family in large groups. They can question what's going on in the world, but you can't question what's going on in the world. They could tell you to read the book How to Lie with Statistics, but if you suggest accurately that they are lying with statistics, they can take your money away, close down your social media page, pillage and destroy everything you've taken years to build. That's what this is really about. They think you're peasants. They think you're slaves. They think you are so far below them and that they're just going to wipe you out, take all the money, take all the power, take all the control, and in 10 years, when there are no restaurants to go to except for Amazon and something that's controlled by Uber Eats, then they'll look at you and say, oh, you know what? We just figured out maybe there are bad side effects to what we did. Obviously, there's terrible effects to what's going on. Suicide, depression, mental health decline, physical health decline, a rise in domestic abuse, child abuse, people missing cancer screenings, obesity on the rise. And the negative effects to obesity can very likely kill more people than what they're trying to shield you from, even though it's probably not even possible to completely shield anybody from it. The flu vaccine has been around since around 1942, and the flu has not disappeared. Well, it did this year because COVID came around. Interesting. But you can't question it. You just have to submit, lose everything, as they tell you that tens of millions of people can eventually starve. But, don't even think about that. Just put on your mask, submit, and let us ruin everything and make you depressed. These are sick, evil people who will do anything for power and control. And in 2021, we will see if we the people do something about it or submit into peasant status. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. And if you'd like to support my work, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/raretalk. Since they demonetized most of my Facebook, that helps a lot. I do independent research. I did this all myself, recorded it all myself, edited it. No big donors, no major media, constantly getting harassed by both sides, constantly being knocked down by social media. So thank you to everybody who supports on patreon.com/raretalk. If you'd like to get one of my shirts, I have dreamrare.com. I will bring these hats back soon. They're out of stock, but we'll have the God Bless hats. We have a lot of cool censored shirts, one with my face on it. If you'd like to support dreamrare.com, I appreciate it. My free email list is stayintouchwithme.com. Please sign up to that. And most importantly, have a good day, have a good New Year's, and let's try to make 2021 a good year and a free year. Thanks again.